Let me bring you back to 1999, when the Carnegie Corporation of New York asked Mark Tucker and Judy Cotting to look at what was happening in American public education. The foundations had given grants with scores of millions of dollars going into American public education, but they couldn't see the results, couldn't see consequences for those kinds and that level of funding. So what was going on? Carnegie also had the premise that where there was good leadership, there were results. And so they asked Mark and Judy and the team that they put together to look into the areas of law and medicine and the military and the other enterprises. And this is where I came into it. My background was that I had been dean of the National War College in Washington, D.C., and was able to talk with the investigators for this project about how leadership training occurred at the strategic level at a place like National War College. So I gathered two deans that preceded me and myself and the current dean, and we talked all of these issues out. In parallel, they were looking into the world of law, and medicine and business. So here's what we concluded from those discussions. We concluded that we in the military and professional development were really focused on our own practice. We were very interested in after-action reviews. We're interested in all of the research base that we had for better effects. We were interested in looking at what we were doing constantly to try to make it better and to share those practices. And each leader had a responsibility to bring other leaders along. In fact, we even had that within the performance review cycle for every officer across all the services at that time. So what we were really concentrated on was our practice. And then the light bulbs began to go on, because what the doctors were saying was they were a practice. And the lawyers were saying, hey, we study our practice too. In fact, doctors and lawyers call themselves practices. And they understand that they have to have the best practices to keep up with the enterprise that they're engaged in. And that struck a bell. The second major point that we discovered was that we learned in cohorts. And that wasn't really true in the world of public education so much, where individuals took individual courses to improve their talents and their competencies, but they didn't learn in cohorts, in learning communities, professional development communities. And another piece of this, that the professional development really needed to be research-based and job-embedded. And by that, on the input, that you really were bringing forward lessons and understanding and concepts and insights that come from real practice. And on the other end of it, that it was leadership, consequence leadership that we were most interested in. Show me the results of what is happening. So on both ends, we were looking at the full spectrum of practice, from the inputs and the behaviors, finally to the consequences of the leadership. So with that as background, the study eventually concluded, and it was published in a book called The Principal Challenge, published by Jossie Bass in the fall of 2002, although the book was completed in 2001. So now what to do? The initial funding of $1 million from Carnegie of New York had been depleted, and we needed to move forward. Well, in the spring of 2001, the Broad Foundation, New School Venture Fund, and the National Center on Education and the Economy began to fund what turned out to be the design and development of NISL. And we opened the doors officially on the 11th of July in 2001 here in Washington, just a little bit of time before 9/11, of course. That fall, we issued the first of the RFPs for assistance, and the consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton won that. We have been working with Booz Allen Hamilton for the online portion of what we were doing since 2001 in the fall. We also had the luxury now, and rarely does anyone really get this, of having a group of experts around the country that we could rely on. We had $11 million in development and design funding, and we had the time to do this, a couple of years as a matter of fact. And so we gathered the best that we could around the country. And the initial group was led by Tom Sobel, who had been Chief State School Officer in New York under Governor Cuomo for a number of years, and who then was back at Teachers College. He chaired the effort. And we had one each from Harvard and UPenn and USC and Vanderbilt and a number of other colleges and universities. But we also had not just the world of education represented, but I was on that committee with a military strategic background. And also from the world of business, we had Bob Joss, who was and still is the Dean of the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, and also Marie Eider, who at that time was at Tuck School of Management and subsequently moved to Sloan School of Management at MIT. And they were very, very influential in what we were doing, because the world of business really did have a better handle than we did as a group on how to structure a executive leadership program, along with the coaching and mentoring at the executive level that really would make a difference.